Hello and welcome to another episode of FinTech Focus TV with me, Toby. Today, I'm delighted to bring back onto the show a company we spoke to at the back end of last year. It's a company that's been doing fantastic things and a company I'm really interested in. We've got a different face for you here after speaking to Nick Root at the end of last year. I'm delighted to introduce you to Gustaf Hult from Intergiro.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
It is an absolute pleasure. We were talking before, I really enjoyed the episode. It was very memorable for me because of the terminology of corporate quitters. We were trying to work out if it was corporate quitters or corporate misfits, but we'll come on to that in a minute as well. Nick was out in Portugal. He'd just been surfing at that sort of stage and was a far cry from his previous life in suits and banks, etc. We've just been talking about that. We've moved from Portugal. We're over into Northern Europe. We're in Sweden today. Tell us a little bit about your background first and foremost, Gustaf.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm basically an old car salesman, ended up in the financial industry for 10 years. So I did 10 years of traditional banking. And when I actually realized that traditional banking was too traditional, I had been working with large institutions and large FinTechs for quite a while on the relationship side. And then just met Intergiro. We had a possibility to take in a few small FinTechs and give them basically large institutions coverage. And that's when I met Nick, and he quite quickly convinced me that this is the shit, to be honest. So later on, I just had a new wardrobe, skipped the suits, and ended up with this. And this is 2 years ago now.
It must be a really different sort of thing, as you say, 10 years in suits, in offices, working in a corporate environment, to what I still believe is a 100% remote business, right?
It is. Or we do have some offices around where we gather to, many people. Stockholm's a hub for us, Lisbon's a hub for us, and some hubs in Poland. So there's the possibility to work together with others, but also remotely, wherever you want. If you want to surf, go do that. But as long as you make sure to produce.
Not so much surfing in Sweden, though, is there?
Well, they are actually quite good.
Oh, look at that!
Cold, to be honest.
Yeah, that's the difference. That's the difference. Look, for those who didn't manage to see Nick's episode, first and foremost, I urge you to do that once you finish with this one and do a double header. But for those who haven't seen it so far, tell us a little bit about Intergiro. In fact, tell me a little bit about what prompted you to leave that sort of safe world and move into something fintechy, new, exciting, and bold.
Yeah, I think that goes hand in hand with the corporate misfit thing. So back in 2017, we realized that there were too many left outside of traditional banking, and that banks didn't really understand some of the business models that these digital businesses were looking at. So we hatched a crazy plan to build a banking platform of ourselves. And the bank plan lasted for about 2.5 minutes. Banks are obviously quite expensive to run. So we ended up with a Swedish EMI license, and then built a cloud native platform from ground up, really, where we allow small, medium enterprises and others to do basic banking services, really, such as accounts with multi-currency, cards, payments in and out, easy user administration, etc. And then quite quickly, we realized that this platform we had built was kind of well prepared for also allowing our clients to embed or issue financial services to their clients. So we built a single API on top of this infrastructure, where we then allow our clients to onboard their users, issue accounts to their users, and issue cards to their users. So, and also, of course, facilitate payments, but all with their own front end. So they can build whatever they want, of course, within the boundaries of the law and due diligence, KYC, etc. But there's so many business models that have been there that has sort of been lacking to have good technology behind it, and then just to connect basically traditional banking with technology. And then also at the same time, 2019, we became principal members of BaaS and MasterCard. So both on the acquiring side and on the issuing side. And all these three products or modules put together is actually really interesting to work with. So that was sort of what was dragging me from traditional banking and the fast-paced environment that this has.
And it must have still been one of those things that would have been, deemed by, I guess, friends, family as a risk to move from where you were. You invested 10 years into that sort of career. What was the thing there which said, I've got to get involved in this? I mean, you met Nick, as you say, a couple of times. He's a great guy who I can tell is super passionate about what he's doing. But you're there, and actually, I think even more interestingly is when you were looking at that, it wasn't one of those businesses which you guys took on in the bank at the same sort of stage. But there was obviously something indelible that got left on you to say this is the right sort of play. What was it that gave you that edge?
Yeah, it's actually true. We ended up rejecting Intergiro from covering them from a traditional banking perspective. So no, but it was basically Nick as a person obviously has a vision, and the vision was super interesting. And being the first one in a commercial team, build something from ground up with a great sort of school that traditional banking had taught you. All the processes were in place, everything were there, and going to a blank paper, that's a challenge to say the least. And going also from, I would say, almost 75% politics to none of that, and just basically do things, iterate, do them again, fail, and sort of then you move on. And it's been I've grown so much as a person, have wonderful colleagues around me, very sort of professional in that way, but also challenging, super challenging. So the first half year, I must say, I were not producing too much, and then sort of fell into this fintech gap. And I think from all perspectives, I won't go back to traditional banking in a way. So I had the opportunity, both financially and in my life, to take on that sort of risk-free to full risk, but definitely never regret it.
And if you're there, and I think this is always something where I want something our audience to take away and look at these and be inspired from the journeys that people have been taking. You're the first feet on the ground commercially, as you say, in the business. If you look back over that period and what you've learned and what you do differently, or what you've picked up, some of the key messages that you give to people within that sort of thing, people who are at that sort of same exciting stage, they've moved in from the corporate world, they're just about going on this entrepreneurial journey, they're the first commercial feet into it. What would be some of the pearls of wisdoms that you give to those people?
It's a good question. So the first thing would be there's no perfect. Things can be thought through, but they will never be perfect in this environment. So iteration will always happen. So do things, make sure they are good, obviously, but there's no perfect. So don't wait for the moment until you think things are perfect, but move forward. Another thing is that challenge your colleagues, but also get challenged. So receive feedback in all instances. How can we do this better? Just the other day, I received some feedback based on our business model and how we actually do things. And this was initiated a year and a half ago, and it's already outdated to some extent. So, I mean, in that sense, you also need people around you that challenges what you actually decided, and then just 1 year later, things needs to be looked at again. So, but growing as a person is probably the most exciting thing that you will end up doing, and building something from ground up really is very satisfying in many ways.
I think there's a big thing that I've seen similar to what you're talking about there, which is where people have come in and just taken on so much change, and I think that they sort of try and bring in that corporate experience into the organizations which they're doing. They want to add value, so they do it by saying, look, we need structure, we need that sort of process, etc. And it's kind of the enemy of what you want to do in an iterative environment. So where I've seen people succeed is where they've worked with people there who say, look, you're here for you as opposed to your experience, and just look to be yourself and to learn and to listen and not touch things straight away, but to understand that environment and bend to that sort of environment. Because I think there's a lot of people who've I always think about the Shawshank Redemption, where he's institutionalized and then comes out and finds it very difficult in the real world. That's an important aspect, I think, for people to recognize that when you're out there, it's going to be different, and to give yourself the time to adjust and acclimatize to those pieces. Anyway, that's just a fascinating byproduct.
I think that's really valuable, and I mean, yeah, see it as, and this is easy to do in retrospect than it was sort of during these first 6 months at least. So yeah, see the traditional side of, or corporate side, as a great school, process in place, everything, and then sort of take that into consideration, but also make sure that you do what's most valuable at the moment.
Yeah,
makes most of a difference.
I agree with that. We were speaking beforehand, and you talked about not liking this word, and I think mainly because it's an almost impossible word to say. So I'm going to go with it, but the democratization of the industry. I'll go with it from there. But I'm really interested in this, and I kind of like to picture you guys as the sort of the Apple pirates in the industry in its best possible sense, to be shaking things up and doing things differently. And as I was talking to you about beforehand, I think that maybe 8-9 years ago, I was involved in a lot of conversations with people who were talking about the FinTech revolution. And I think it all went very quickly from revolution into evolution. I think it went from people there talking about disrupting and disintermediating the banks, into the banks then showing, flexing their muscles and basically creating innovation labs, which is basically sucking innovation out, but bringing all these people into it and taking the products into, changing their DNA a little bit, but still keeping very much the structure of it all in there. And I think that whilst we saw some improvement and evolution in the industry, I think the whole thing of disruption was sort of blown apart a little bit. And I think what we see now is a whole bunch of tech that comes into it that can make things better and improve things. But I still think financial services suffers from lagging behind certain other areas, which has embraced technology a hell of a lot more. And I mean, it took a global pandemic for cloud to really be trusted and adopted into an industry, which it still has a hell of a lot more possibility to be improved in. So you used a phrase which I loved earlier on, which is how the financial industry is gatekeeping evolution of financial services. And I think that how you guys come into that to say, look, it doesn't have to be this way, is a really interesting piece, because it should be, as you said, giving control back to the people, which, without trying to be too revolutionist about this sort of thing, it should be a process there where we are. And I say this all the time. I think this is, the phone has basically revolutionized people's expectations of how they should bank, how they should operate, how they should buy, how they should do almost every single part of their day job. But we're still stuck there with some very traditional views in our financial services ecosystem that sort of stifles some of that potential for innovation and growth. So I'm really interested to unpick that a little bit with you and sort of say how actually the revolution lives strong, and there's still opportunities here for banking to be better, rather than to see this slow trend of gradual evolution that we're looking at in the industry. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, we're still dependent on traditional banks in one way or another. They've built the infrastructure, and it's kind of hard to go away from that. So in one way or another, where we would be a tech layer, basically translating old rails to new rails, and that gives some opportunities going forward. But I mean, yeah, also when it comes to everything from understanding a business model that's digital to actually that corporates can generate their own revenue on their own financial streams rather than paying a bank for the services that I provide. So I think with giving it back to the people and to the corporates is basically a way of saying, all right, build the financial services that you want, rather than accept the fact that someone says this financial services there is, and you need to adopt to them. So yeah, back in the days, I would say the adoption have been too much. So banks have really set an agenda where they can allow basically, themselves to stipulate how things should look and feel like, not from a client perspective, but rather from their own perspective and what's most beneficial for them. In Sweden, it can be hard to get a currency account, despite the fact that you actually invoice in another currency. But on the back end, I mean, someone makes 2.5% on the FX. So that sort of thing is kind of hard for me to understand, and we have the technology for it, and the set of APIs is obviously, well, here to stay, and I think now at least Nordic banks are translating into XML and ISO 20022, but they could actually really skip that and just go straight to the API world from my perspective. But yeah, I mean, coming back to it, banks have a strong position when it comes to corporate finance and investment banking, all of that. That would probably still be in the framework of financial institutions or traditional banking. But apart from that, I really see that other things would happen where clients actually want to make their business.
And what drives that? Because as you say, it's a difficult thing to disrupt years of and the power of those sort of institutions, right? So it's you're not it's a David and Goliath sort of play in many respects. So when we look at that and we think about the forces that are against it, and I mean, in my mind, the obvious thing is demand. You've got consumer demand there that wants something new and wants change. Which is which forces decisions to be made, and we've seen it force probably unwanted revolution within evolution within the financial services. But how does it take the next sort of level? What with a business like yours that's got all this sort of potential, all this sort of excitement, what does it look like? What does the future look like for the business, for the industry? How can you paint a picture of what the future holds for us?
Yeah, it's a good question, but I think right now a lot of focus has been around payments and sort of apps and to get consumers, to give them a new experience. But now we're looking into more bank-like features, loans or deposits, and it will sort of eventually incorporate all of the banking aspects in a consumer-friendly model. And I mean, look at Apple. What they're doing is basically just turning an iPhone into a FinTech and giving the people accounts, giving the people the possibility to lend for credits. So, I mean, traditional banking where it used to be isn't necessarily there to stay. And I think banks have been missing that point for quite some time.
And as you say, there's I 100% believe in that traditional banking is changing, and as you say that they those banks themselves aren't necessarily being swift to recognize that. Maybe it's an element of hubris, arrogance, ego. Maybe it's the whole too big to fail thing, which I'm surprised about considering everything that we've seen over the last couple of decades, etc. What do you think drives? Why aren't they worried, and why should they be?
I think they have. Yeah, no, I think they are to some extent. I think they also have a super important role to play in society. I mean, let's not get away from that. I respect them fully, and I think we need to coexist. It's just that we can push them forward. So what has happened for a Swedish bank, for instance, they did this innovation lab thing, ended up with actually a banking as a service product in the end. I don't expect them to be as sort of quick paced that some other fintechs, but still, they found this industry and area quite interesting, which also says something about the industry as such. So yeah, if we can sort of motivate banks to also be a part of the evolution, then I think there's a win-win. And coming back to traditional banking, it's not too long ago where we basically didn't want to help other banks to become better. And this is something that I definitely see in the fintech industry. Like, we are so good at helping each other. I can give you this if you give me that, and there's room for everyone. And together we make a better product, not only for ourselves profitable, but also in terms of the client experience. So in that sense, I think there's more generosity between fintechs, and now the banks understand that to a better extent. But I mean, coming back to what could happen is basically to allow, I mean, take a product like an FX forward. If I'm going to somewhere abroad, I know that I will have this currency, and perhaps I want to buy this currency now. This is something that has been sort of gate kept by banks traditionally to a few selected people, but
Mm.
it's not rocket science. So I can actually hedge myself to go on this trip later on. Why not? Why shouldn't I have at least the possibility to do it? So yeah, it's really products that we can allow and give back to the people to some extent, at least.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff to unpack in that last piece, and I think a big part of it is, you know, this growing trend of collaboration. And you know, if I shoot back to when I first started working, you know, this sector 20 odd years ago, it was a fiercely independent, competitive industry. So you know, it was almost tribal in terms of looking at, you know, the banks and how they, you know, sort of kept each other at arm's length. And I think even down to, you know, interoperability and everything around that, and how, you know, people are looking in terms of how all, you know, APIs are probably the biggest, you know, changing this, how we can have things there that could be suited and tailored to, you know, individual businesses to, you know, to work together. And then probably 2008, then having another effect of saying, right, how can we work together to improve things, and seeing much more collaboration in the sector. I think it makes it a much more exciting sector. And as we said beforehand, that revolution to evolution piece was all about, right, we're either going to be disrupted here and battle and go to war, or we're going to say, how can we help, and how can we you know, how can we improve, and how can we invest in the right sort of things, and still keep that sort of, I guess, you know, real structure to an industry, but also add value to it at the same sort of stage. So I think that sort of collaboration is a fundamental trend that is shaping, you know, the business for the better, and the industry for the better. And I think that's probably something we can see continue over the course of the next couple of years. Speaking of the next couple of years, I want to sort of move on to that a little bit from both an Intergiro perspective, and what we can start to see, expecting, you know, from you and the team, because I know there's some interesting things that you're doing. But I also want to look at it from an industry perspective. I don't think there's any sort of economist out there in the world at the moment who's getting things nailed on time after time, right? There's a lot of volatility, a lot of change. And actually, we're seeing an awful lot of incredibly speed of evolution and stop of evolution in terms of various bits and pieces. Digital assets, you know, even 9-10 months ago, it was evolving at a speed that was going to become, you know, commonplace by this sort of stage. Then obviously you've got some concerns about everything with FTX, etc., that made it very different, and that has the brakes pulled on it. But I still think that its time will come with digital assets. It's not gone away. It's just changing at the moment, metamorphosis at the moment. I think you see the press at the moment is all AI and how that's going to come in here and destroy humanity, and everyone getting very panicked about the moral aspect of AI and what it means for various different people, which is another interesting part of it. But I don't think that's necessarily going away. I think it will have checks and balances again, and regulation again, that sort of looks at where we're going. The banking industry is a fascinating one for me, because I think speculators have long said it's going to be this, it's going to be that. You're at the very forefront of that evolution in the space. I'm really interested to get your take of what we can look like over the next couple of years, and what we will actually see happening in the space.
Yeah, thanks. So I think in chaos, there's opportunity as well. So I would say many look into sort of how, what kind of cost drivers they have, what kind of revenue opportunities out there, and sort of that could actually lead to that they evaluate and move into another type of financial services aspect. So from a corporate perspective, but going forward, I think, yeah, things will calm down a little bit, and I mean, yeah, there's too much going on in the world to actually see what's sort of around the corner. But unfortunately, we have got used to a war-like situation, so the market has sort of taken that in. Yeah, but it's interesting to see. I don't have too much of sort of, because what you see is basically, I think what we'll see is a lot of regulation coming as well. So basically regulation of digital assets, which we welcome, because then I think more will be willing to take it in. What we'll see is also some other types of regulation when it comes to validation of accounts, meaning that you can look up an account so you actually know that you're sending it to the right person. We see some changes in the Nordic market But yeah, it's too hard to predict. So.
It really is, isn't it? I mean, it's one of those sort of things, isn't it? Where if you were sat there in 2018 and sort of look forward, none of it would have been would have been predictable, right? And I think what's really interesting actually is how the lessons of 2008, and look, there's probably a little bit of context to that with what we're seeing with SVB and the US regional bank system, etc. But there's lessons that are coming into it in a much more robust financial industry, I think. And I think as that moves further forward, the one thing that will 100% be predictable is that regulation drives the industry further forward, and I think that's incredibly necessary. Look, when you see, when I talked before about digital assets, and you're looking at Britain looking at the digital pound and seeing that evolve as quickly as it has, there's a lot to be said around that, and you can even look east and see what's happening in China and everything around that as to where this sort of goes, and the data and the information and data becomes central to it. So, but I think what I love about the conversations I always have with you guys is just how there is a real potential for a different landscape, that allows Davids to compete with Goliaths, and actually the real winner in that sort of story is the consumer. The real winners are the people there who are looking to have things better, with less friction, more productivity around it, reduced cost, increased speed. All of those sort of things are exactly where I think companies like yours can come in there and change the industry for the better, right?
And just tagging into that, I mean, also corporates, because what we can do with our infrastructure, we'll just be in the background, but we can embed our services into an ERP system. So if the ERP system is actually where the corporate does their business, but then they approve in the bank sort of environment, but we can move all of that into the ERP system fully, let the ERP system issue accounts, cards, etc. So then they become the bank, and the bank becomes obsolete in one way or another. So I mean, yeah, it's an interesting way forward. And also, I mean, open banking, I think account to account will be much more sort of used. Same there, we can issue those accounts and we'll be happy in the background. They can just do whatever they want to, but they will be much closer to their merchants. So yeah, it's a very interesting industry to be in, and there's no sort of business cases where we say, hey, we're out of this, we can't really see a way to cooperate, or any ideas.
And that's the beauty of it, isn't it? With you, the collective bunch of corporate misfits and quitters. There's a bright and brave new world out there to be looked at. So, look, I'm going to finish with a question I always ask, which is, who should be reaching out to you at the moment? Who are the right people to be speaking to? Who can you help? And the second part of that question is, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
So, I mean, both founders and CEOs is what I normally speak to. CTOs, they really like or understand what we're trying to do. So I think at that level it's basically something that we're really keen to just get this on the agenda for strategies going forward. And then, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on WhatsApp, etc. So feel free to just reach out. We're just a phone call or an email away.
We'll tap you into all of that, and make sure you're tagged into it when we release this post. It's been a fascinating conversation as always with you guys. Love what you're doing.
Thanks.
Keep up the good work, and thanks for coming on the show.
Ditto. Yeah, cheers. Take care now. Have a good one.
Absolute pleasure. Likewise, and thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on another episode of FinTech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.